What if democracy isn't about the privilege and power of a vote every few years, but something we live out every single day? What if the real strength of a democracy isn't measured by ballots cast and bills passed, but by the character of the people who shape it? What could a democracy be when it's anchored in humility that seeks to serve, ambition that reaches for the collective purpose of everyone, and unity that embraces our differences without dividing us? It's not about political theory. That's not what we're going to be talking about tonight. It's about a personal commitment, because the future of democracy doesn't belong just to politicians. It belongs to all of us. It's a time in our history when cynicism is high. We know that. Division runs deep, and trust feels a little bit like it's on life support. Maybe the real question isn't what's wrong with our democracies, but what kind of people does democracy require us to be to thrive? Hey, my friends, welcome back to the UNCOMMODiFiED podcast. I'm Tim Windsor, and today my guest once again on the show is Colleen James. Colleen, welcome back to the show.
Hello. Hi, Tim. Thanks for having me back again.
It's awesome to be back together. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to listen, I originally did a conversation in January of 2024 with Colleen. It was entitled Decolonizing Hearts. Great conversation. If you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to find it and listen to it. It's a great conversation. But tonight, we're going to have a bit of a different conversation. And for those of you who happen not to know who Colleen is, let me just give you a little bit of understanding here. Colleen is a visionary leader. She's an elected official, so that she's going to give some wisdom to us. She's a regional councillor in the region of Waterloo, which is about 45, 50 minutes sort of west of Toronto in Canada. She was also a candidate in the 2025 provincial election in my province. She's an entrepreneur dedicated to equity inclusion, and she is an amazing kick-ass community builder. That she is really good at that. Now, of course, every great conversation for me sort of starts with a drink. Tonight, we're going to be drinking different things, but still drinking. What are you having, Colleen?
I am having coffee today, Tim.
Coffee's okay. You ran out of wine, I hear.
Yes.
I think you ran out of wine. Okay, well, I didn't run out of wine. Actually, a friend of ours was over for dinner last night, and he brought me a bottle of Australian wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon. It's actually really good. So, cheers to you, my friend.
Cheers. My cup's upstairs, but I'll get it more.
You'll get it. You'll get it after. You're gonna be flying without coffee. This should be really good.
Yeah.
Okay, not a problem. Listen. All conversations start with a great question. So I want to give you 3 questions that I want to sort of shape our conversation with.
Okay.
And we'll tuck into each of them, but I want to give them first to you. So we're going to talk about what is democracy? Like, we talk about this thing, and I don't think we are all on the same page about what is a democracy. And what is the quality or state of our democracy currently in Canada from your experience in the areas that you work in?
Yeah.
And why is democracy potentially worth contending for all of us? That's the questions I want to get into. So let's just start with this idea of what is democracy from your perspective and from your experience? What is this thing we call democracy?
Big questions, Tim. So that's a
big
question. So I would say, the typical way people think democracy is you've got elected officials who make decisions about communities, provinces, countries, however the level is. That to most people is what they see as democracy. I think democracy is really an individual thing. Yeah. Because I often say people aren't necessarily their government. So what makes democracy? That's an individual perspective. It's also communities. It's the microcosms of the communities that we're in. Every environment that we're in has somewhat form of a democracy. And again, based on the individual. It is not necessarily the elected officials who are given the power and the privilege to make the decisions. The people are the ones who have the ability to really inform. I just don't think it's utilized enough and respected enough in some cases too.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, when I talked to you, you were in your journey originally and looking at getting onto council in Waterloo region. We first connected, then you got into council, and of course, then you ran, in this case, provincially in our province. So again, if you don't live in Canada, if you're in the States, that would be like a province is like a state, just in case you don't know that. Depending on where you live in the world, in several of the countries that you list to, your system might be a little bit different. But so you go on this journey. First of all, I have to understand, like, why would you put yourself through this? Like, you must be a glutton for punishment, Colleen. Come on.
You're not the only one who said that. I think so. I ran regionally and have so much experience in the local municipal politics. And,
Mhm.
there was a snap election about to be called. And for me, it's not just about me. Sometimes I think we need to take risks. And we don't as people enough. We try and take calculated ones. And I just said, if I don't, am I going to regret it? That's one of my decisions. I don't want to look
Mhm.
back and think I shoulda, coulda, woulda, and didn't, knowing that the odds are slim.
Mhm.
And I guess the other thing too is, you need good people to run. You
Yeah.
need good people and people who care, people who are community driven. And I think that was part of the driving factor too. I don't ever believe that it should be a shoe-in for anybody. When we're dealing with democracy, there
Yeah.
should be choice. And if people don't have choice, what does that do for democracy, Tim?
Yeah. And maybe that is one of the founding principles, or really the pillars of democracy, is having enough quality choices
Absolutely.
that a person can look at an individual and their platform and their policies and understand how they align or don't align with thinking. Of course, I do think that this idea that one person is going to represent all the views of all their constituents, obviously, it really isn't possible.
Exactly.
But that's got to be a really big challenge as you serve the community here in the municipality where I live,
Yeah.
and you're making decisions and have all this responsibility to make decisions on behalf of your constituents, but yet your constituents have all these competing beliefs and understandings. So how do you, as an individual councillor in this case, or maybe somebody who would have sat in our provincial legislature,
Yeah.
how would you have gone about saying, how do I synthesize the opinions of people and figure out what I need to do or how I need to vote?
This is where I think it's so important to be connected with community, to
Mm.
be able to have the differencing of opinions, to hear the different perspectives. For me, that is how you make informed decisions. You can look at multiple different perspectives and not just think about the impact tomorrow, but the impact that the decision's going to have 10, 5, 15 years from now. Because most of what we're navigating, Tim, and the challenges we're facing are because of policy and decisions made 20, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
multiple governments. So, I think there is also that understanding and knowing that you're thinking for now, but you're also thinking for the years ahead. And then a key component with all of those different pulling and pushing of different perspectives, being able to say, wait a second, where's the common ground between all of this? And
Mm.
sometimes you make decisions that may go against a certain group or perspective. But I think part of being in a role like this is being able to come back to your why and being able to say, okay, this is why I made this decision, and being grounded in that. And it happens every day. Made some tough decisions a few weeks ago. I had a lot of people upset, but I could come back to that. This decision was made as a result of, and that I've heard and I understand. But again, it's really, really paying attention and being uncomfortable sometimes in spaces with community.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So you're on this journey, and you are starting to say, look, I can have a place in this democratic system that we have, and it is a privilege to live in a democracy.
Yes.
We all have an opinion about how functional our democracies are, but we live in a privileged part of the world and a system where we're allowed to have a voice, and that voice can be heard, and we can vote, and all the things. There's a lot of people around the world that don't get that. So you're on this journey. What have you learned about yourself?
Oh boy.
And what are you learning about others along the way? And I'm going to ask it this way. What are you learning about others that you really is a really an awesome positive learning? And what are you learning about people that maybe is like, man, that's just problematic. And I don't know how do we get around these things?
I think one of the things I learned, especially in this role, is, when people use their power, privilege, their level of influence for good,
Yeah.
And then the opposite of that is when people in various spectrums, it's not just political, use their power, position, privilege and you think about the moral and the ethics around that, the integrity about that. I mean, you know, like the narrative around politicians and politics and business, it's corrupt, it's this, it's that. And you know what? It's a mix of everything. But you see throughout, you meet people throughout who the intentions are solely based on the good. And as much as it can be challenging, but you also know that, you know, within the role too, you have to think about that integrity piece and that ethical piece that goes with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I've had the privilege of working in foreign countries throughout my own career.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a while, I led a program where I taught government leaders in Mozambique and Zimbabwe. And when I worked in Zimbabwe, I was partnering with Robert Mugabe government officials at the time. And a lot of my friends couldn't get their head around that. They were like, how can you do that? They're just so corrupt. And the sort of the epiphany for me was, number one, if we don't get involved and do anything, then there's no way we can ever make change. So that's
Thank
number
you.
one. And the other is corruption isn't, you know, it's not politicians that are corrupt or clergy that are corrupt or whatever. It's humans that
Yes.
have a propensity towards corruption at times.
Yeah.
And we all have to challenge ourselves because, you know, sometimes we're accusing others of being offside in their behavior when reality is that we're just as offside in our behavior.
Yeah, and to realize that and to check that, you know, I think that is something that, you know, comes with experience, something ingrained with people, but recognizing that too. We all have the capabilities, you know?
And balancing a disagreement. I mean, one of the things that I believe in, maybe it's because I'm 60 now, and you know, you start to get,
60?
and you get old and cranky when you get 60. You get old and cranky. Well, I'm turning 60 in July, so I'm almost 60. But the thing for me that I feel is really sad is I feel like we've lost our ability to have debate, to disagree, but to hold tension. And you know, as a teenager, I love to debate, but I love to I always asked for the position I didn't believe in.
Yes.
And the reason I did is because it made me smarter and wiser. And all of a sudden I'd say, wow, I thought that was just crazy bullshit that those people believe. But when I got in and had to defend it, I said, I guess I understand maybe more of their perspective. So the art of debate and the decorum that ought to go with that, do you believe we're losing it? And if so, how do we get it back?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're losing it to, you know, things like misinformation, cancel culture, not being able to be in a room and be in a space and have the differences of opinion and, you know, respect it, be respectful about it too. And I think that's one of the things is like, where is the respect for having differences of opinion? It's funny you say that about debating. I mean, with some of I go in and do a guest lecture sometime and have students talk about democracy and, you know, things like social media. You know, how many years ago we wouldn't be looking to social media to inform people about how to vote or how to feel about X, Y, and Z happening in society. And, you know, the ways in which democracy is playing out is changing. And as a result of that, you have cancel culture at times, you have misinformation, disinformation. And I think part of it too is, you know, we get lazy. We've got that 30-second attention span to something and all of a sudden we believe it. But being able to have a healthy debate is, I mean, that's critical. That's critical for self-awareness, critical for how we view opposing positions and, you know, how we essentially come to common ground, should we be able to.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I was thinking about this recently, you know, in our country, you know, Brian Mulroney, one of our former prime ministers, passed away in the last number of years. And I was reading something from a speech that Jean Chrétien gave. I may have been actually at Brian Mulroney's funeral, but it was around the time. And it was very interesting because here's what he said about Brian Mulroney, who was a formidable political opponent, obviously.
Yeah.
They didn't see eye to eye, but here's what he said. He said, you know, we had a lot in common. We both love Canada. We both had different visions for our country. But then he went on to say, we were political opponents, but never enemies.
Yes.
And I was struck by the language, we were opponents, not enemies. And I have to say, I feel like we've lost the ability to say, I disagree vehemently with you, Colleen, and you with me, and you're my opponent, not my enemy. And I think that this is a lost art that we have to understand if we're going to have a more robust and more healthy democracy into the future. That really concerns me, this polarizing and this you're my enemy, and that I think that's just going to continue to rip us apart.
It will. And I think part of this too is we need to recognize too, there can be more than one truth. The difference is the perspective and in that truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we recognize there can be more than one truth, then the perspective is influencing that truth. We should be able to have debate and discussion about that and not be enemies as a result of that different perspective and different truths or narratives.
I totally agree. I often say to people, and I say to my customers sometime, and I have said to you listeners before, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see what I'm talking about. I often say, truth is like my hand, Colleen. It looks different to me than you. You see knuckles, I don't. I see a palm, you don't.
Yeah.
And we can polarize, and I can say, you're wrong. It doesn't have that. The reality is it has both, which, to your point, truth is omnidimensional. It is so complex. And there isn't just one way of looking at, quote, the truth or even data. We all have a different lens or even bias that we bring to that experience. And I think part of this also is being able to say, I have bias. I have a way I'm looking at this. And you might have a unique vantage point because of your position, but you never have a complete one.
No. We've talked about this before. We all have bias. It's being able to recognize that, especially in roles where you're making big decisions, to say, wait a second, there is a bias I'm looking at this perspective from, and then doing the intentional work to find out the other perspectives. That is the hard thing for people to do.
It is so hard. I often say to my customers, and often when we're talking about maybe a problem they're having in their business and they can't see eye to eye with somebody else, and I say, look, you need to rent their eyes. You need to see this thing. You got to get inside their head, their skin. You got to see the world from where they want to. And even when people make really what we consider bad decisions or poor decisions, the reality is if we hold enough faith, and if I believe that you're a great person trying to do a great job, I have to also believe you made what you thought was a great decision. I might think it's a terrible decision, but in fact, you thought it was a great decision. So it behooves me to say, hey, Colleen, I may not have made that. I may not have voted that way.
Yeah.
But you obviously have great intentions for our community. Why, from your perspective, do you believe this is the right way to see it? That, to me, is how we hold tension and actually learn.
Learn and hold ourselves accountable, too, because there's an accountability piece in there as well. You should be able to ask the necessary questions, but also be able to answer them.
100%. No, for true. And again, listen, if you're listening in today, we're having a conversation about, again, you might be just seething right now because again, might be your problem and you need to go, I don't know, take an Ativan, get a drink, do whatever you need. I don't know what you need to do, but we're talking about complex issues, and we're also trying to talk about them in a way that we can hold that tension, have a good conversation. And so I want to highlight something so we just had in Canada, obviously, a federal election. And again, if you're listening in, your party may have won or didn't win or whatever. It doesn't really matter. And again, this is where I'm fascinated when I hear how people communicate. And Mr. Carney, in his speech after he won the election, he highlighted three really powerful ideas that I want to tuck our conversation into. He talked about the interplay between humility, ambition, positive ambition for the future of the country, and unity. And I found his speech compelling. Again, I might have a different opinion about Mr. Carney as a person or his politics. It doesn't matter. I found his speech absolutely compelling. And so I want you to think about this, and I would like to talk this. So let's talk about the place of humility in our political system.
Boy, that's another big one, the face of humility. And what comes to mind for me is that, recognizing we're not perfect people. We may have the best intentions, but also there has to be space along the way for if there's a mistake that happens, and how do we learn from that? And that is the humility piece, that we aren't perfect. We may have the best intentions with everything we do, but recognizing that, sometimes there are things that are going to go wrong, and decisions that are going to be made. And humility, in any leader, you want that. You want to have some leader in whatever sector, whatever business, that has that humility to know that, and is humble enough as well, to recognize that things may not be perfect, but that's how we learn. That's how we get better as a country. And even within sometimes the errors, the mistakes, the missteps, whatever you want to say, it's an opportunity to bring people together and unify it as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
You did something wrong, shut it down, get out. It has to do with balance too. And I think, with Carney's speech, Prime Minister Carney, I think there was that element of hope. There was an element of humility. And let's be real, this man is taking on a big challenge right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we can't expect perfect. We can't expect right away. No. And I think there was some grace in the way he said what he needed to say.
Yeah, and I have tucked into this idea around, vulnerability and humility in my own life and in my own consulting practice for a long time. And the other thing that Mr. Carney said as he led up to that, which was just so powerful, because again, it just challenges what we think leaders ought to say. He made the statement, I have made mistakes.
Yes.
And I will make more mistakes. And when he said that in that speech, there was something that resonated so powerfully. Now, of course, if we're cynics, we go, oh, well, yeah, somebody wrote that for him, and that's just bullshit or whatever. Yeah, and that's the problem is that we, cynicism is just really not that helpful most days. So I'm gonna let my cynic voice get out of my head and just hear what he said. And I loved what he said, because he admitted he made mistakes, but he told us he's going to make more.
Yeah.
And I don't think the average leader is able to do that on a regular basis. We have this persona that we're trying to sing. We all say, we're going to fail and everything, but actually owning failure, owning mistakes, when things get messed up, or you make a decision and you thought you had all the right information, and frankly, you find out later that the data and the report, actually, there was a problem, and all of a sudden you're going, wow, I really messed that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So owning mistakes and understanding that humanity is a powerful part, I think it's part of being a great leader.
It has to be. And we need to see more of that too, because we know what it looks like when you don't have leaders who have humility, who are humble, who, frankly, operate like, this is the way it has to be. This is the only way. I am right. Everyone else is wrong. And it doesn't necessarily bring people along. It just divides people more.
100%.
Yeah.
And maybe this is where, so we got this humility, this idea that, hey, we don't know everything. We need each other. I think this is a good pillar of democracy. But at the same time, we want to be, as Canadians, we often want to be super humble, We want to say sorry a lot, and we want to be humble. But then he talked about this powerful ambition for the sake of the future and growth and wanting to be better and different. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So when you think of ambition, and again, I don't think we're just talking about personal ambition here. We're talking about ambition for the sake of the community.
Yeah.
So when you look at that, what role does being ambitious and industrious for the sake of what you're trying to do, how important is that to this democratic equation?
Well, I think it's a necessary part of this. You have to be ambitious, but and I know as business owners, with that ambition takes risk.
That's right.
And being open to that as well. And it's, if we're not ambitious, things just kind of stay the same as they are. So when you have opportunity and you miss that opportunity, it speaks to the lack of ambition and where opportunities are as well. We need to ensure that with anything we're doing, we're thinking of that growth mindset. In order to have that growth mindset, you got to be ambitious in what you're doing. You got to be able to take risks. And I think now more than ever, especially, thinking about the, elbows up, all in, we have to be ambitious and aggressive. And yes, I would agree. We have this it's in us to be sorry, to be humble to a fault sometimes, when we don't showcase all of the good, the benefit, the resources that are right in front of us. We minimize
Yeah,
that sometimes.
yeah, I totally agree. And again, we might have a different vantage point on this because we've never discussed it. But the one thing I would say for me in the current climate of what's happening, I have U.S. customers. I do a lot
Yeah.
of business in the U.S. I have a lot of friends in the U.S. So, I have this relationship that crosses the border on a regular basis. And the one thing I think I've come to believe is I actually believe that the great thing that could happen as a result of this, I think we have made ourselves too dependent on the
Mm-hmm.
United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have, and some
I
people will
agree.
will not like this to say, but I think we haven't been ambitious enough because we've had the benefit of this access to this wonderful economy for so long.
Yeah.
I don't think we've crafted the kind of international relationships at times that we really need to.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. Again, that's my bias.
Yeah.
I don't know what your perspective on that, but that's how I feel about
Tim,
it.
I agree with you 100%. We have not leveraged what we could have. We have not, taken opportunities and leveraged them. I think that's about risk adverse, playing it safe, being friendly neighbors. And there's more opportunity out there. I mean, we're seeing it now. And when you think about ambitions, you think about other places that are not on, our Western side of the world, that are very much taking those risks, being ambitious, moving ahead leaps and bounds. So I think, there is something to be said there about what we need to do, as a country, but also individually. And we can still have our friendly neighbors to the south, but
Yep.
there's opportunity there to showcase what we have to offer, that I know people would want to benefit
Yeah.
from.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, so when you get into politics, so I meant one thing I know is I am a rather impatient person,
Yeah.
and I know that you are a super urgent person. Like you have the gift of you're a kick-ass community builder, but you got the gift of getting shit done. You get shit done, Colleen. Okay,
Thanks, Tim.
so now you get into the political world. Are you surprised at how fast or slow everything happens? Like, is this like do you go like, oh my gosh, I never really knew it was going to be that fast, or more likely that slow?
Oh, yeah. So I'm not surprised on how slow it feels like things move. But you also remember things move slowly because there were so many different perspectives.
Yeah.
There's a lot that needs to go into any decision. And I think that's the downside too, with sometimes in this kind of role, stuff. Sometimes I say I wish I didn't know, but stuff, and it's like the public doesn't know. So it appears like things are moving slow, but they're moving as fast as they possibly can, because all of the different intersections that are involved with a decision. But as we know, government, it's the legacy, I think, with any government, any level, it's a hurry up and wait. That's what I find. Hurry up and then wait.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess there's that old adage: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go
Yes.
together. And it's gonna take some more time. And I guess, and that's where I have to admit that my impatience would mostly get the best of me many days, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, this
And
is what you find, the small wins in other areas to kind of keep you grounded and settled. But when you're dealing with government and multiple levels of government, things just never move quick enough. And when they do, Tim, you got to wonder about why. That's when you question, if something's moving really quickly, why is that happening?
yeah, what's going on here? It's moving way too quick. No, that's kind of funny. That's funny. Okay, so we've talked to this idea of humility. We've talked to this idea of ambition.
Yeah.
Let's get into this idea of unity. So unity is a word that we use a lot, and people have lots of ways of understanding it, and probably some really bad ways of understanding
Yeah.
what does being unified mean. So when you look at what you do in the worlds you do it, of course, you got your business world, you got your family, you got your community, you got regional council, you got all the stuff you're involved in.
Yes.
So what does unity among a diverse group of people really mean?
Mhm.
And what does healthy unity look like from your vantage point?
Oh, another big question, Tim. My goodness. Okay.
I know I got big
Good thing I had
questions.
my coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, To me, unity is, if so, I look at it this: if there's a challenge, there's an issue, there is something, to me, unity is finding within the challenge, within the diversity, where is that common ground? Where is the thing that everyone can say, yes, I agree with this? And how we get there may look different. You may be working in different parts for a little bit, but the unity is what is, let me make it as simple, like just to simplify it. People want less speeding in their communities, so you can bring together, or people want bicycle lanes. I'm going to use some hot topics here.
Oh, here we go.
So you're going to have the people who want bicycle lanes, the people who don't want bicycle lanes, but the one thing people can agree on is that they want to have a safe community. So how do we build and design these communities that make sure that there is safety from the cyclist, the driver, the pedestrian, walking or rolling or however? There's that common element. And that's how you can create. We're not always going to disagree, and maybe not everyone's going to be happy with the outcome, right, but there is some element that people will agree on that needs to be worked on. So, looking at that from a unity perspective,
Yeah. So it's unified yet different. It's unified but not a raw conformity that everybody has to find the same thing. I will tell you this. I'm gonna give you a pet peeve of mine in the local community, because do you still live in the same place you lived when we first met?
Yes.
Okay, so we live in the same community.
Yes.
So that means, does that mean you're my regional councillor?
I absolutely am.
Okay, regional councillor Colleen James. I got a bone to pick. Okay, so my wife and I walk our little dog every day at 6:30 in our community, in our neighborhood where you live as well.
Yeah.
And the other day we're walking down the road and my dog's relieving himself on the side of the road, and I'm getting ready to pick that up, which is the dutiful thing I had to do.
Yes, good.
And four teenagers come at us on the sidewalk on their motorized scooters.
Yeah.
And I've about frankly had it. Like I am not a happy guy, because I believe that the bylaw in my community is those are not really supposed to be on the sidewalk. That's what my belief is. Now, first of all, I want to test my belief. Is my belief correct about the bylaw that actually they should not be technically riding those motorized scooters on the sidewalk?
It depends on the age.
Okay. And what is the age?
So typically 16 or above should be on the sidewalk or should be on the road. Okay. If it's under, they can be on the side. It's typical, like with bicycles as well.
Okay.
Same.
Even if it's motorized.
Motorized, but it also depends on the speed as well.
Okay.
So. Yeah.
Okay. So then I'm learning right now, which is good. I didn't know this. This is good to know. Yes. So now here's another question. So these teenagers approach us and they're coming fairly speedy, and I said to my wife, I'm not getting off the sidewalk this time because I am tired of being told that I have to get off the sidewalk. Yes. So I stood there with the dog. The dog's doing the thing. They come right up to us, and the guy says, "Get out of my way." And I say, "Actually, no, you can wait for us to pass."
Yeah.
Of course, the conversation didn't go so well after that. But the bigger thing for me, it's decorum. It's like when I was younger, again, I'm old now. When we rode our bikes, and if we did ride on the sidewalk, we would go around people, or we would stop. At least in my fantasy mind, that's the way I think it was. I feel like now it's like everybody's in their quote right to be there trumps everything else in relationship to my right to walk in a safe way on my sidewalk with my dog.
Yeah.
And so I think this is an example for me of how these problems happen, and I don't even know how do you work through these as a counselor, because I'm sure this kind of stuff comes to you guys all the time, where people like me come all revved up and say, I don't want these whippersnappers on my sidewalk.
Oh, you should see the emails about the speed cameras. What I will say, Tim, is that something like that boils down to respect. Mm-hmm. That is just common respect, common decency. What I see now is there's a sense of entitlement. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I don't know if it's just people are, I get to do whatever I want and I don't care about anyone else. That comes down to respect. So it's the simple principles of share the road, share the sidewalk. The pedestrians typically will always have the right of way who are walking. And where is that lesson not being drilled down, especially when I think about teenagers or youth?
Yeah.
And I'm like, is that element missing when we're thinking about things like AI and all of the ways in which technology is advancing? Where is that conversation about respect and neighborly respect in this case? Similarly again with democracy, they feel they have their rights, but how do we ensure that we're respectful for others who your right was to walk your dog, their right was to roll down the street?
And if I'm going to be really honest, my right trumps their right every day.
Well, and then
that's how I feel, and I know that's wrong, but I'm just being honest. That's how I feel.
Well, respect. I'll say this, not disrespectful. Respect your elders too. It comes down to respect. So if we have a democracy where we don't respect one another,
right?
Is that democracy? Is that a healthy democracy? I'll say that. It is a form of democracy, but is it a healthy democracy?
Is it a healthy democracy? And again, this goes back. So we got humility, we got ambition, we got unity, and we're adding another. We got another pillar, which is mutual respect for one another, and a give and take that says, hey, this time I can step aside for you. How about you step aside for me? The problem is if you never step aside for me, my desire to step aside for you, and maybe the sidewalk is a metaphor here.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes, again, if I step aside for you and give you right away, and you do the same for me, we have mutuality.
Yes.
We have equity. We have something of equity in the way we treat each other.
Absolutely.
But if I expect you always to step aside for me on the sidewalk of our community, whatever that means, then there's going to be an ultimate problem in that, and that may be partly where respect comes back into this discussion. And I think it's a really brilliant.
It's a good
discussion.
Metaphor. It really is, because
it is.
If you have, I'm right. This is, you got to give me the right of way first. You got to listen to what I say. My decision, the way I see things. It's true. It's a really good metaphor for democracy.
Yeah, you can use it. Hey, you can use it at council sometimes.
I know.
You can use that metaphor at council. You can say, I was talking to an angry constituent. an old cranky old man. You know what the best part of the story is? I said to my wife after, if they would have hit us, it would have been perfect, because it would be like seniors walking dog get hit by teenagers. It would have played so well. I'm just kidding.
But to me, it's actually disheartening too, because it's about mutual respect and really taking that 2 seconds to pause. And then I think about, if at whatever age it is, significantly younger than both of us, and there's not an awareness for that.
Yeah. That is going to be a challenge. And again, we all have a responsibility in this. And I know that I, if I'm really honest, I think my rights trump everybody else's most days. That I'm human like everybody else. And I think that what I think is more often right than wrong. And we all suffer from our own hubris.
We all suffer from that to some degree.
Yeah, we all suffer from that hubris. It happens. So at the end of the day, democracy is something not just to be defended, but it is to be, we have to hold it in some kind of honor.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, what's the one thing that if people could take out of this conversation and could say, this is something I could do to enhance the sense of democracy within my community, within our province, within our country, within our world? What would be the one thing that you would say, man, this in and of itself is probably one of the transformational things we all could remember that will make the quality of our democratic systems and understanding even better?
I think one of the biggest things that comes to mind for me is just, taking the time to understand different perspectives. Different narratives. Remember, there can be more than one truth. So if I feel that there is a truth I know, well, wait a second. What is the opposite end of that? I think it's recognizing the different perspectives. And I think that helps. You can still believe what you want to believe after, but also having the context as well to say, there is another side to whatever it is. Just like the different party platforms, There's multiple perspectives there. And then, part of a healthy democracy too, and how we can ensure democracy is really taking the time to understand, what do we stand for? What are our values internally, right? And recognizing that, because typically we tend to gravitate people with the same values, the same, understanding what those values are, and using your voice for good. I will tell you too, to vote, but again, that's, there's so many people who will not vote and then complain. I hope you voted, Tim. And then that's all part of democracy. You said it right before. We are very privileged to be able to have the opportunity to vote, because so many people do not. As you know, in some places, I'll give you a little anecdote here for your listeners and stuff. So when I was knocking on doors in minus 20-degree weather, and I had volunteers with me, and I had a volunteer who was Eastern European, and we were knocking on doors, and I said, have you ever knocked on doors before? And he's like, so you're just knocking on doors to talk to people? I said, yeah. He's like, well, in my country, if the person running knocks on your door, they're giving you $200 and saying, vote for me.
Oh my gosh.
That is so, it just goes to show also the way democracy looks outside of our bubble here can be very, very, very different.
Yeah, it's true. I don't think you gave me $200.
No, I did not. I did not.
No. Yeah, full disclosure, Colleen gave nobody $200.
No.
And I will say about voting, I have to admit, and I'm just going to be really transparent. For many years, I never voted. And part of it is that I allowed cynicism to get the best of me. And I will tell you that actually it was a transformative conversation. I had a number of years on this. I'll go on this podcast. Yeah. So we have a friend, Marilyn Gladue, and Marilyn has been a member of the federal progressive conservative, the PC party, for a number of years, and I think she just won her third term down in the Sarnia area where she lives. Yeah. I'm actually originally from Sarnia. Okay. And I had her on the show years ago, and we had a great conversation. And I had to admit to her, I haven't voted. And so I am one of those people who, frankly, let cynicism get the best of them. I didn't vote. I bitch and complain, but I never voted, to be very frank. Yeah. And so I have started to participate more in the political process. Yeah. I have an opportunity. Again, it's a privilege that many people around the world don't have, and we take it for granted in sad ways. And I also have come to believe this, actually. I do believe that one of the most important votes we could cast in our political system in Canada is our municipal vote. Oh, yes. It is the thing that happens closest to and influences my, the person who could do something about my sidewalk is not in Ottawa or Toronto in my province. Okay. And so actually, I think that's a challenge regarding municipal politics, because I think that we've often seen this in reverse. We think somehow it's all about the macro, yes, but I think it actually is about the micro.
Yeah. I can't tell you, if you look at the voter turnout, you'll see federal will get lots of people, municipal hardly anybody, like 20-30%. But it's one of those, the minute you turn on the tap water, you're driving on a road, those are municipal decisions that are taking place. Where are the stoplights going to go, right? Your garbage being collected, how often, all of those things impact us daily, and people don't recognize. But what I like to say, and what I've heard before too, I can't take this quote, but if you're not doing politics, it's going to eat you for breakfast.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. Well, listen, Colleen, I always love chatting with you. You're an inspirational person. You're extremely wise. You're very, very smart. But in addition to that, you have a wonderful humility and a way to look at the world through different lenses, which I appreciate. And I love this conversation. And I think it's really important. Again, if you're listening in, I always say that you listen in for a reason. And I don't know where in the world you're listening to this podcast. I mean, I think there's 25, 26 countries where people listen to this podcast now, and you may not have the same privileges that we're talking about. I hope you do. And if you don't, I hope that you're working in a constructive way for the benefit of your community, whatever that looks like. But my challenge, I guess, as we finish up to you listeners would be where I started. You know, what if we could have a democracy that was anchored in humility, just super anchored in humility, and it sought to serve each other and one another? What if it had unbridled, wonderfully positive ambition for the collective progress of all?
Yeah.
And what if it embraced a unity that understood that our differences don't have to divide us? What if that was true? Because at the end of the day, we do have to move beyond political theory.
Yes.
We have to understand it's a personal commitment to those who vote and those who run. Because I do think that the future of our democracy, it doesn't just belong to politicians like Colleen. It belongs to me and you and to all of us, unless we allow it to be dominated by others. We have an opportunity to have a voice, as Colleen said, and I would strongly encourage you, regardless of where you are, to understand what that means and to not take for granted the privilege for those of us who do live in democratic systems, as flawed as they are, that this is worth contending for. Colleen, thank you so much for your time. It's such a gift. I know that you're crazy busy, and I appreciate you doing this. I know that you've got a lot of work to do to get me safe on my sidewalk, so that's good to know, Colleen. And again, thanks for joining in. If you listened in, you're listening for a reason. Do me a favor. Email me at tim@uncommodified.com or DM me and let Colleen and I know how you're wrestling this discussion. And do me a favor, as you do that, don't argue with your friends. Don't polarize. Have a wonderful debate, and remember that you are opponents potentially, but not enemies. Cheers. Have an awesome day.
Thank you, Tim.